Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have you here, and we're so excited to be launching our Elevating Voices series. As some of you may have already heard, have attended some of our other events, the Center for Global Partnerships and Learning is a value add for our students. Some of the things that we do and engage in are the Scholarships Without Borders Journal. So I know some of you have already submitted articles. Some of you are peer reviewers. So thank you for that. We also help students publish and do work around publications and have office hours to that effect. We offer certificate programs. You can see on the screen a list of the programs we currently offer that are rolled out and actually in practice. In fact, at the end, we'll talk about one that's currently being offered. And overall, our Elevating Student Speaker Series is it's meant to elevate and to kind of tie into the expertise that's already inherent within the GSCP community. You know, we tend to bring in speakers, we tend to go outside for that expertise. And what I wanted to do and what we wanted to do in the center is really kind of look internally to our own community, to our own student population. We have a lot of expertise already in-house, and we wanted to leverage some of that. As we continue with this program and with this series, you'll hear from other students, you'll hear from our alumni, and you'll hear from our faculty. So please join us through this journey, and hopefully we can tap into your expertise should you choose to join us as well. So thank you for being here. You're muted, Asia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gabby. Sorry for being muted there. What I'm going to do is go ahead and I will share Sharletta's slides, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Sharletta Green. The recording of this talk will be available afterwards as well, and we will definitely go ahead and let you know about that as soon as we get the recording out. All right, thank you so much for that question. And if you've got any more questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat, as well as at the end we're going to have question and answers, so definitely feel free to be engaged after that. All right, let me go ahead and quickly stop our share for a moment and grab the other PowerPoint. So 1 second here. All right, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and start. So while I do this, my computer just went a little. This is what happens. Yes, this is what happens when you're trying to share something. Give me 1 second. I think I just need to. Okay, there we go. All right, we're going to go ahead and share this. Play from the start. All right, can you all see this? Great. All right, so let me go ahead and introduce Sharletta. Sharletta Green is a first-year Pepperdine PhD student here with us. We're so honored to have her come today to talk to us about reclaiming the art of storytelling and cultivating safe space and developing community in the midst of civil unrest as a form of leadership. So Sharletta, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Asia. Thank you, Dr. Miramontes, for this opportunity, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today. To explore with me the use of storytelling in our leadership. Let's begin our journey with looking at our current challenges and the way we can use storytelling for a variety of solutions in various contexts. We live in a deeply polarized world. We have failed to live into the ideas that we espouse about community and democracy, humanity, and the need for care for one another in order to thrive and not just survive. These challenges are exposing a deeply fractured U.S. culture, and it is reverberating around the globe, due in part to the failure of leadership, personally, spiritually, socially, and politically. How do leaders take bold steps to develop platforms for difficult conversations and constructive spaces that are safer, that create community, and explore frameworks that give rise to truth-telling, accountability, and a spirit of concern and care that leads to transformation and opportunities for empowering leaders, elevating voices, as Dr. Gabby would say, and to lead from their center and not just from deficits etched in fear and othering. So let's look at storytelling a little bit deeper. Storytelling is an ancient art form that humans have used for years to chronicle their lives and lessons they've learned, the challenges they've experienced, the evils they've encountered, the triumphs they've been able to celebrate, indwelling as inhabitants on the earth. The art of storytelling is verbal and it's nonverbal. From the hieroglyphs in Egypt to the art on cave walls, to the Mayan symbols that are there to remind us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, storytelling has been used to inform the next generation on how to survive, giving wisdom and encouragement to all that come behind. So why is this ancient art form still relevant? And how can it assist us as leaders in the 21st century in a sea of civil unrest and polarized politics, religion, and economic distress? Well, storytelling for our purposes today, we're going to use storytelling to connect with our audience, create safer space, and develop leadership skills. In the process of using narrative, and I'll use the term narrative as well as storytelling interchangeably, and I'll explain throughout our time together why. To communicate with our leaders, to encourage their gifts, to hear their stories, because we bring all of who we are to the table, and it is our stories that we operate out of. So let's look at our agenda. We're going to set a theoretical framework for our purposes tonight, and I'm going to tell you about my own personal frame, what informs my story and why my story is important in my leadership. We're going to talk about how to connect our stories. We're going to look at the 5 frames of our stories. We're going to develop and create safer space. And then we're going to have some time to interact, because I'm going to invite you to share stories and how you use them in your leadership. And then we're going to have some time for question and answer. Feel free throughout our time together to post your questions in the chat as you're going along, and Asia will take care of those questions for us, and we will make sure that we strive to get to as many as we possibly can. So there are many different theoretical frameworks that one can draw from to employ storytelling. One of the things about storytelling is its openness to being creative and coloring outside of the lines. The gift of appreciative inquiry, which is this theoretical framework I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight, is that it opens an opportunity for a team and for us as individuals and leaders to do a few things, to discover and to dream, to design and to deploy. And that is what storytelling does. Storytelling allows us to discover other places, to reimagine ourselves, to imagine new ideas in non-threatening ways. We can dream big of new worlds and new conceptual spaces, and we can design in words and images blueprints for our work and dare to make these dreams come alive in our leadership. So my theoretical framework is a womanist framework. For many of us, we were able to hear Dr. Felicia LaBoy a couple of weeks ago talk about womanism, and I'm not going to rehash what she shared, but I will say that the word was coined by Toni Morrison. You can go to the next slide. In her book, Coming Apart, and then again, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Woman is Prose. And it's defined as you acting womanish. That means that women, in particular Black and African American women, would say to their daughters, you're being too grown. So what does that mean? Well, this behavior is audacious, it's courageous, it's responsible, it's willful, it's acting grown up. And we're going to take it one step further, because when we look at it a little bit deeper, it really is about being women who are anchored in the community and are willing to care holistically for the community. In this picture, you see three women who are part of my world, who introduced me to what it means to be womanist in their storytelling and in their being, where they really focused in on what does it mean for the community to be well? How do we take care of one another while taking care of ourselves? How do we introduce new ideas? How do we reframe old ideas that are not helpful for us without leaving anyone behind? How do we operate in wholeness from a center? And that is important to the work that I do and we will do together tonight. So, are you ready to go on a journey with me? In this picture on your screen, you see the sunrise, and this is Mount Sinai, Egypt. So let me tell you why this picture is important and why it's important to my story and why this story continues to inform my leadership. In 2005, I had the great pleasure as a seminary student to go to what we call the Middle East and travel to 6 different countries with complete strangers for all intents and purposes. And we were from all walks of life. We were Christian of every hue. We were Jewish and Muslim and people who were questioning faith and people who were like, well, maybe we understand this thing of faith, but we were from all walks of life taking this journey with biblical archaeologists to walk into these spaces that are sacred to many, no matter what their religious tradition is. So this band of people who were from all over the northeastern and southeastern part of the United States are in the dark, and I mean pitch black, because there are no street lights. And we dare to take this journey up a mountain that is holy, where for people who are part of the Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Moses received the lessons, the laws that would govern the people. So we, at midnight, in the pitch dark, in a foreign country where most of us did not know much about Arabic other than Yalla, come on, and Shukran, thank you. So we are really placing our hands and our lives in the hands of people that we don't know really well, and we start this journey. So we are introduced to these guides who do this every single day, and we are hoisted up on camels. And these camels are a little bit angry and a little upset because it is pitch black. And they are having to make this trek up the mountain one more time. So it's a 4-hour trek on these animals who make awful noises, who get an attitude, who will dare to sit down in the middle of a trail and decide they don't want to move. And we watch this amazing journey unfold. So we're on our camels, we're all set to go, we're going up this mountain. We can't see anything, we can't use lights because the lights will scare the camels. So we're really just making this journey really on faith and trusting complete strangers to make sure that we get there safely. So we're going up the mountain, and I will never forget my guide's name. His name was Fiaz, and Fiaz spoke broken English, but enough for me to understand 2 important things. Fiaz was looking for a wife, and Fiaz had lots of camel. And he kept talking about his camel and the good living that he made and wanted to know if, I wanted to be a wife of some sort. And I was like, really? The universe has jokes, right? You're going to really have someone that I can't see, that I really can't communicate, ask me to marry him on the top of a mountain in the dark on an animal that's having a meltdown. At any rate, we continue this journey up the mountain, and it's amazing. We can see the stars, and we can see some of the planets, which we don't get to see with all the lights in the United States. And we continue this journey with people who will be friends that we will keep in touch with for years to come. We get to the top of the mountain just as light breaks, not before the sun starts to rise over the mountain. I take a moment and I look around and I realize that we are all God's people. I'm looking and beholding the beauty of creation, not just the desert, not just the sunrise, but each of us created in the divine image, no matter what we call the divine or how we see ourselves. It is science at its best work. And the sun slowly rises over the horizon, and we are all looking. And for a moment in time, we are all one. There is nothing that separates us. And then we all strive to chronicle this moment by sharing what it means to us. Some people pray, some people sing, some people are discussing what it means to them to behold the beauty of the sunrise. Nothing that we can do in and of ourselves, but something that we are able to behold. And it's there that I see that the differences that we have aren't because we're that different, but it's because of the way in which we see what's going on and we tell our story about it. I fell in love with humanity all over again on Mount Sinai because I realized how amazing we are and how much we have in common. And it's in that space of commonality that the story really begins. We are a part of a story that is much bigger than we are, and that story connects and intersects. So let's talk about how we can use these types of stories in the work that we do. So what is your story? You heard a little bit about my story and why it's important, but what is your story? How do you use your story to diffuse situations and provide examples to inspire your team or students or employees? Is your story a story of activism? Does it empower others to claim their voice and their space? Are you an educator? Do you use your story to educate people about what's going on in the world around them? Do you use your story to lead? What about instruct? Is your story told through music and song? Do you write lyrics? Do you play an instrument? Do you raise your voice in order for you to communicate your story? Are you an artist? Do you use the colors and the gifts of being able to draw and to paint to invite people into the story? Or do you stand behind the camera and allow that camera to take the pictures that write the story that you share? Is your story local or is it global? How does your story unfold? Does it inspire? And how then do you connect your story so that others hear that story, hear their own stories, and find ways of leveraging that story in their leadership and their being? So I've said that our stories connect and they interconnect and they intersect, and we're going to look at the way in which it does this. So we need to talk about how our stories get framed. Let's look at our personal narratives. So we have several frames that are part of who we are, part of our narrative. The very first story that we receive in our lives is the story of the family that we're a part of. And that family story then connects everything else that we do. It's the family story that then gives us a spiritual story. It is the spiritual story that invites us into the social world. It's the social world that then invites us into the political world, and that political world that then helps us to move back into the circle of personal and family. So let me unpack that a little bit more. So spiritual is really what centers and anchors you, the frame that you work out of. It might be the faith journey that your family is on. It might be a particular religious perspective. It just may be the way in which you are centering yourself in the world. Whatever it is, that is your spiritual space. The social space is really, how do I interact with the rest of the world? I have this family that I'm a part of, and this family may be a little dysfunctional, and it may not. It may have some good points, and it may have some struggle points, but whatever it is, it's mine. And I have to learn how to govern that story and utilize that story as I navigate the world. The political part is not about our politics, not about the framework of whether you're liberal or conservative, or whether you're a Democrat or Republican or a libertarian. It actually is about how we govern ourselves, how we look at the rules around us, what the world says, and how we engage with that. Question is, how many of you speed? Anybody ever gotten a speeding ticket? It's a governance question. Am I going to drive a little faster so I can get the place that I want to go a little faster, or am I going to follow the rules? It's a governance question. That's political, personal. Everything about who we are is this personal space. And the question is, then how do we narrate that story of who we are, of whose we are, what makes us tick and move in the world, and how then do we use it to interact? The story we tell ourselves, the story we tell others, the way in which that story then informs the work that we do, what we're excited about, what makes us uncomfortable or puts us in a space of dis-ease, how we judge what is going on is all a part of the way in which the narrative that we have internally allows us to then gauge and engage with the narrative that is much bigger than who we are. What's most important as we think about storytelling and narrative, particularly when it comes to how then we begin to use it in leadership? Well, the question is how it informs you, how it informs your interactions with others. Are you centered and anchored in this space called love? And does your story invoke the space of love and care for other people and for yourself? Does that story then maybe invite some doubt when you're listening to what other people are saying, when you're thinking about some things in your own world? Does it elicit joy? And joy is not something that someone else can do for you. It's an internal bubbling up. So does your story inform the joy that you have and exude in the world around you? Does your story have some pain? And in that pain, does that pain allow you to connect with others in ways that are empathetic? All of us have some fears, and the question is, how does the fear play a role in the story and our interaction with others? Are we so afraid that we won't step out into the deep? Or are we afraid enough to say, I know this is a little scary, but I'm going to try it anyway? Does your story then invite you to ask questions? For those of you who are in class with me, you know that I love to ask questions, and I will ask questions in a variety of different ways because it is also how my story is part of what I do by questioning and reframing. So we continue this, we then realize that we must listen. And it's an active listening. And listening is a full body experience. It's an invitation for us to pay attention, to pay attention to ourselves and how we're feeling and how the space makes us feel. It's important for us to pay attention and to pay attention to the room that we're in, the people that we're engaged in with, and to really, really take that time to be fully engaged and centered. It's an important part for us to seek to withhold judgment. I know it's hard, right? Like sometimes things just sound ridiculous. And sometimes if you have had the opportunity to engage with me, you'll hear me say, oh, I do not do dumb well. That's a judgment call, and I know it. And so it's withholding judgment as you're listening for what people are sharing. Being patient is an anchoring space. It's being patient with ourselves and it's being patient with others as we do this difficult work of listening, of being present, of sharing and engaging. Body language is another important part of active listening. Know your own body first. Are you tensing up when you're hearing someone else's story? Are you relaxed? Are you engaged? Do you move forward? Do you make faces? I have a friend that tells me that my face tells stories without me ever opening my mouth. So body language is really important. It's important to restate so that we gain clarity. Always be more curious than certain about what we think we know and what we think we've heard, because oftentimes someone will say something to us. It gets filtered through our story, our lens, and it's really not what they meant. So it's important for us to restate things for clarity and then to question. And it's okay to say, I don't know enough about what you just shared. Can you say more about that? Can you expand on this aspect of what you just shared? And that way, you're inviting them to share and not demanding that they share. All of these things are important in this aspect of storytelling and listening, and then moving into the way in which we cultivate safe space and leadership. So cultivating safe space is not an easy task in the world today. We all are very different, and what is safe to some people is not safe for others. And so it's really important that when we are using story as part of our leadership, that we give people enough time to think about what that means. Prepare the space, prepare your people, make sure that the room that you're going to have this conversation in, the space that you're going to have the conversation is inviting, that you are engaged in being able to see one another, and that there's room at the table for all that are engaged. It's important for us to know that cultivating safe space is sacred work. And so we must be intentional about how we engage with the people we have the gift of leading. We must begin with first setting clear expectations, setting rules for engagement for the conversation, and inviting buy-in, inviting other people in the room to share with us what would be meaningful for them in this type of engagement. Remember, we're doing full body soul work, and it's always a little difficult to share. It's important that we know enough about our own story so that we know what to share and when to share. So it's important for us to seek to invite people to think about their story and how it adds to the story of the organization and to the space. It's important for us to think about resonance. How many of you talk to yourself when you're in the car and pretend like you're on the phone? It's important for you to do that. It's not crazy to do that. It's us learning our story and learning who we are and working through our stuff so that we can engage in a way that's really important. Claim your story. Don't strive to write somebody else's story. Don't try to tell someone else's story. Claim your story. Decide how to share, what to share, and when it works and when it doesn't. And it's okay that if you find yourself in a space, and even as a leader who's inviting people to share, that if people are not feeling comfortable enough to share, that we honor that space as well. And we can say something like, we would like for all of the people to engage in sharing, but if you do not feel comfortable for this moment, it's okay. Making sure that there is psychological safety. There are a lot of stories that have triggers. There's a lot going on in the world that triggers us all. And so it's important for us to know what triggers us first, so that we know how to then work in helping others when they are triggered. We can invite them to take a step back, to take a deep breath. We can shift the conversation. It's also important for us to know that, again, it's always important for us to see this as sacred work. So don't ignore people. There are often people who are shy, who don't know how to engage in the conversation, don't know what to say, are afraid to say it, don't want to be wrong. And it's really key for us to pay attention to that as well. And to invite people in, to invite them to think about if they have something to share. It's also important that when people want to share something with us, and it may not be an appropriate time or space, to acknowledge, I've heard you, and I want to hear more about this. I'd like to do this in a space where I can honor your story in a way that it deserves to be, with my full attention. If it's something that doesn't need to be shared with someone else, in a space that allows for that. Offer a time or a space if it's not a convenient time to do that in that moment. So let's learn and leverage. Stories open space for us to learn and to leverage what we've learned so that we can offer our best gifts, and our leaders and our employees and our teams can offer their best gifts. So we're going to do some recapping. So we're going to listen for response and listening for information and development of relationship. We're going to create no judgment spaces, no judgment zones. We're going to develop rules of engagement. We're going to hold our stories in sacred trust. We're going to create community, and it gets defined differently. And so it's important for us to think about what that means within the spaces that we're in. How are we defining community? What does community look like for us? And how then does the story of who we are as individuals and who we are as a collective unit inform the work that we do? So, in listening to people's stories, they tell you a lot of things. They first tell you what they value, whether they articulate it in that way or not. They tell you what's important and what's not important. They even oftentimes give you clues about their fears. More importantly, they often share with you gifts that they don't recognize as gifts. And it's an important way of utilizing story, so that then you can say, this sounds interesting. That's an amazing gift. And oftentimes people will say, that's not a gift, it's just what I do. And yet it is a gift, and it is a skill that can be used in the work that people do. For instances, in the church, I often sat and listened to lots of stories, drank lots of tea and coffee with folks, and just listened to their stories. And what I realized is so often people weren't invited to do the work in the church because we didn't know what their skill set was. We use the same people over and over again without inviting other people to the table because we hadn't spent enough time listening to what it is that they did. We were able to do amazing ministry with children when we figured out there were grandparents whose children were not living in the community and that they were missing them. we did this after school program, grandparents were like, oh, this is great. They got to show up. They got to have some time with children that kind of were surrogate grandchildren for them. And they often play the role of surrogate grandparents for those children. This is the way in which story, when we listen, can aid in our leadership in a variety of different ways. One more story, and then I'm going to invite you to share with me. So one of the things that I've learned in storytelling and listening to stories is a lesson that I wish I'd learned earlier, but I also would love to be able to kind of walk it backwards and say, I wish I could tell my younger self what I know now, because I would have been a little more gracious in this. So I taught high school, and I had students that went to sleep in my class. And when you're 23, 24, your brain is still not fully formed, and you're trying to do all this work, and you're working with people that are not much younger than you are. So I took it personally. Never take things personally. Most people don't know enough about you to be all that invested in. It's a reaction to something in their world, and you just get to be their target. So my students would go sleep, and I couldn't understand why they were sleeping on me. I was like, am I boring you to death? You need to stay awake. And by the way, one of those students was my sister, whom I flunked. But that's a story for another day. But what I learned in engaging and asking questions about why my students went to sleep is these students came from a variety of different backgrounds, and they were dealing with so much. Some of them had children of their own, and if you've ever had an infant, you know that you do not sleep when they are that little. So if you've got a baby that's crying all night and you've got to be on the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning, guess what? You're going to sleep in class. Many of my students were working full-time jobs because they had to help in the household because they were living in single-parent households. Many of them were caring for younger brothers and sisters. And what I learned, not as graciously as I would like to have learned, is that I never knew what my students had to fight through, had to go through in order to be present at school each and every day. The reality is none of us know what our people have to go through, what they have to fight through, what they put up with in order to get to the places where they work every single day. And yet they bring all of who they are to the table, not as an excuse, but as a place of learning and growing through listening to story. It's important that we ask how they're doing so that we might continue good work together in safer spaces through leveraging stories and learning what we can about the people that we lead. So take a deep breath. That was a lot of information. Let's talk about how you use story as a leader. Anyone want to share?
Sharletta, this is Crystal.
Hi, Crystal.
I just want to say thank you so very much for what an excellent presentation. And
Thank you.
so I do have a view of leadership and how I think a great leader is a great storyteller. It's and the role of leader is the role of a good leader is to inspire. And if you can get people to connect, and my cousin would be calling me if I'm trying to talk. if you can inspire people by connecting them to your story, giving them a sense that you understand, particularly when leaders are trying to help people change in the case of organizational change management, which is where I play. I think stories are super important because they give you a sense of why a company is going on a particular journey, and the story brings the people along. So I think it's critical to help. The story is critical to helping the leaders lead people through change. So that's just my perspective.
Thank you so much. Another great way to leverage story as a change management person. So thank you. Are there others? I think Kaylee has her hand raised.
Hi, Sharletta. Thank you so much. And I echo Crystal's sentiment on, the storytelling as a change mechanism. And, I would just add as a leader, and right now I'm, a professor of public speaking, and I use storytelling to help my students envision where they can be in the future. So when I am inviting my students down a path that maybe they've never gone down before, sharing my story helps to give them an idea of where maybe they could go as well. So that's just what I would add.
Thank you, Kaylee. Yes, story is a great way to connect with students and helping them to claim their own story, right? So many people don't know that they have a story. Sometimes we kind of walk through life aimlessly without realizing that we're part of the bigger picture and the bigger story. And so some of our students haven't figured out that their story is important and that it is a story that gets added to the longer you live, and that they add to the other parts of other people's stories, and that we as human beings are adding to the story of the world that we're a part of. Anyone else?
For me, I found that when I am open and tell my story, especially when it's a story of things that maybe didn't go quite as well, it gives people space and permission to do the same. And it creates a space where people can feel like they're not alone in their own challenges and their own heartaches. And I think it can help encourage people that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that they're not the only one, and that there are other people who see them and who are helping to carry the pain and can be there for them.
Yes, that is sacred work of carrying someone's story and carrying someone's pain. So thank you for sharing that, Patty. Others? We have time for one or two more?
Sharletta, quick question.
Yes.
What would you say to someone who is uncomfortable with other people's stories, or who has who struggles in hearing other people's stories without internalizing them?
So I guess there are a couple of things to Dr. Gabby. The first one is what is it in the stories that are resonating so closely to yours that you can't differentiate between what's yours and what's theirs? That's the first one. The second one is how else might you engage with someone in hearing the story from a different vantage point? And so let me just give an example. So as a clergy person, I hear stories all the time. Like it's what I do. I listen to stories. And sometimes the hard part is where does my story begin? And then where does it end? And where does the story of the people that I'm sitting with listening to their hurt and their pain? And one of the exercises that I had to start doing is really going, okay, so you're getting ready to go and you're going to listen to stories, and this is what you're going to do. And now the task after you've heard the story is to go, this is theirs and this is mine. And this has given me information that's important. And yet it's not necessarily mine to hold on to. I think it's when we resonate so much with someone's story, particularly if it's painful or joyful, that we hold it tight. And it hasn't been used as a learning experience, but it's become part of a being experience. You know, it's like, okay, so this is just so cool. So I think that there are some things that we have to do in keeping ourselves safe in hearing story as well. Journaling, talking it out. But I think it's really being clear about your own story enough that when you hear other people's story, you can make those distinctions and you don't hold on to it. And that's one way of doing it. I'm sure that there are some therapists in the room that would offer some other insight. I spend a lot of time talking to my pals, my clergy buddies and friends, when those stories become part of the challenge and asking, what are your thoughts on this? And part of it is talking it out with someone that you trust, so that you can say, like, this is just a story that, like, I can't seem to let go of, and I don't know why. Other questions? More questions? Dr. Gabby?
Oh, you know, I always have questions.
Of course, of course.
I guess the other piece where I was curious is when you have competing ideas, right? And you're looking at your narrative is different from that of somebody else's narrative, and you're at opposing ends. So how do you meet in the middle when you're so far apart? If my story, if my history, my story, my narrative impinges on yours, or it's perceived to impinge on yours.
So, so let me tell you about my roommate from the Middle East, and this will explain how I've dealt with this. So I was a 20-something-year-old, and she was a 50-something-year-old, and you know, all the tropes, you know, white woman, privilege, those kinds of things, Black woman, student. You know, she didn't understand why faith was so important to me, and and we battled back and forth. Like, it was, the first couple of weeks was just torture, right? But we spent enough time really kind of having these hard conversations that she would not have had with anyone else that looked like me, because that wasn't the world she was a part of. And so, you know, there would be comments like, well, I think you all just complain too much. And you know, in all honesty and transparency, I often hum Jesus, keep me near the cross, so that I don't yell and cuss and fuss at folks. And so I learned to ask different questions. So why do you think that? What is it that you've seen? What is it that you've experienced? I think it's important for us, when we are in those different places on opposite ends of the spectrum, that we're okay with saying, we may have to agree to disagree on this. I will not diminish your experience because I don't know what it is, and I would ask that you not diminish mine. The other way of looking at that then is, but I'm willing to walk a journey with you if you want to learn. I'd like to know a little more about your journey, even if it's not mine, even if it doesn't resonate with mine. You know, I don't know what it's like to be able to drop cash on a car, but my roommate did, right? And what we did was we spent time, sometimes in gridlock, but in dialogue, in intentional dialogue. And it has to be intentional on both parts. You cannot be in a space where you're actually going to even have some wiggle room if both parties aren't willing to be a little bit nimble. And it's not about changing your story or diminishing your story, but can we push a little bit? I don't understand that. That's just outside of my realm of experience. By the end of the trip, we had become really good friends, and we are still friends to this day, because we dared to, at opposite ends of the pole, the importance of faith, the struggle with life, being from two very different worlds and seeing the world very differently. We had a moment where it was like, I don't want to fight the whole time. Like, this is miserable. What is it that we're missing? And what it was is she didn't realize that she had to know nothing about who I was as a human being, but was only looking in based on what she'd seen in the news, what she'd heard, or what she'd read. And now she was coming face to face with someone who was saying, yeah, but I challenge that because that's not the whole story. That's just one part of the story. And I think what you're saying is oftentimes when we do this, when we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, it's because we have a small window that we're looking at, seeing someone else's experience. And maybe we have to take a step back. And sometimes it's okay to say, we're not gonna work this out. I'm gonna bid you blessings and I wish you no ill, no harm, but this is not a space where we can reside together. And I think that is as important in leadership and conversation and storytelling as anything. I'm going to honor your story and I want you to honor mine. I want to make sure that there's give and take. And when we can't do the give and take, because we are so polarized and we're not willing to move on this, maybe we need a timeout. And maybe we need to go into our separate spaces. The goal for me is never to change someone's mind. It's always to open their eyes to see something else that they haven't seen. But if they don't want to see it, then they're not interested in seeing it. Then they've stepped away from the sacred work of storytelling and of leading. And it makes it very difficult for us to engage. That would be my answer to that. There are more than one answer. So that's not the only answer. Other people may find other ways of doing that. And so feel free to share if there are other thoughts on some of the questions that are being asked. Usually it's my turn to ask Dr. Gabby really difficult questions. And so I appreciate her asking me really difficult questions tonight. Are there others? Anyone else just have some like burning thoughts that they want to share about storytelling, about creating safe space, about the craziness that we're living in and the reality that it's never easy work, but we must be intentional about the work that we're doing?
Hi, Sharletta.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the presentation. It was amazing. I love to hear your story. And I also agree with the comments that Crystal made.
Sue Ellen, you're muted.
Kaylee and sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say that it was a very interesting presentation. I don't have difficult questions. I left this job to Dr. Gabby today. I just want to say that I appreciate your presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Again, this is just one aspect of storytelling. It's one way of thinking about how we lead. It's one way of seeking to connect at a human level. As we think about who we are and what we do, the work that we do as leaders isn't about the organization. It's always about the people. If we haven't connected with the people, if the story of the organization, if the story of who we are together doesn't resonate, it doesn't matter how gifted people are, it doesn't work. This is the challenge in polarized systems. When we forget that it's about people and their lives, and lives are messy, we miss some opportunities. There is a question in the chat from Mitch. How do you see storytelling and the opportunity to do so being impacted in the virtual environment we're all operating in? That's a wonderful question. It is difficult, and it was difficult preparing for this tonight, partly because I cannot see folks. You know, I have a screen in front of me, but I don't get to see whether people are with me or whether they're questioning looks or those glazed over looks that I'm used to getting in the classroom when I've thrown out too much information, or that I got when I was preaching and people were like, it's a different concept than what I'm okay with. So part of it is, I think, multi-layered. The first one is when you're wanting to do storytelling in a way that moves, you know, leadership in particular. I think it's important for you to invite people to think about being in a space where they can leave their camera on that's safe, so that you can see people, so that you have that kind of engagement and interaction. I think it's also important to really think about what aspect of story that you want to use in the virtual world. Not all stories work in virtual world, and so it's important for us to think about that as well. But it's making sure that whatever you do and however you do it, that you've gotten good buy-in with the people that you're engaging with, that you're all on the same page, and that you're all working toward the common goal, that you honor the sacred space of story and sharing and carrying one another's story, the joy and the pain of that, and listening to see what you're missing any other time, so that you might invite people to use their gifts. I will close with this. Only you can tell your story. Tell it boldly and fully. Only you can sing your song. Please sing to the top of your lungs and offer it freely. Only you can offer your gifts in the world. And someone out there is waiting for you to share who you are through your story, because your story will invite them to tell theirs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharletta. I know we've got a couple more questions rolling in on the chat. So here's what I like to do to make sure that we honor everybody's time. We're probably going to be a couple of minutes over.
Right.
I would love to, first of all, say thank you so much again to Sharletta for just giving us such a great way of, and reminding us about why stories are so important. And if for any questions that you all have, please go ahead and send an email to Sharletta. Sharletta's email is right here on a screen. Go ahead and write it down or take a screenshot of it and get in touch with her, so she can go ahead and answer your questions. And also her website, centeredwholeness.com. Go ahead and get in touch with Sharletta. Now, there's just a couple of announcements we're going to make before we end our meeting right now, or our webinar. So if you just give me 1 second here, I will go ahead and I will share that with all of us. So here we go. It's a little bit of a, you guys switch PowerPoints all the time here. That's the only thing. Oh my gosh. And then just trying to like get this to go. Okay. So we do have certificate opportunities for those of you who are interested in getting a consulting certification. We have that happening. It will be starting on April 17th, going on April 17th, 18th, and then the 24th, and then again on May 8th. So 3 Saturdays and 1 Sunday. So if you are interested in becoming a consultant or getting your consulting certification, please send an email over to Rachel Gutler or Dr. Ed Eng, or you can give them a call and they'll be more than happy to share with you more information about this. But we would love for you to think about getting a consulting certificate. So if you have more information, or if you want more information, or if you want to register, get in touch with Dr. Ed Eng, and then you can visit the Kairos Consulting Center as well. Also, just a quick introduction to the team. Since this is our first Elevating Voices speaker series, and we are all here, we are all working together. And so I just wanted to introduce you to everybody who are either on the call or not on the call yet, but will be in future events. Obviously, we've got Dr. Majidi, who's our Associate Dean. We are housed under him, our center's housed under the Associate Dean's office. We have Dr. Gabriela Miramontes, who's our Director and leader for the Center for Global Partnerships and Learning. And then there's Dr. Brame. There's Dr. Sonia, there's Melissa, Kim, myself, Ida, and we all thank you for being here today and for hopefully joining us in future events. Which reminds me, we do have an event coming up next Friday, April 9th. You can go ahead and register if you see the link where it says register at Linktree. So that's the link to register. Go ahead and register for the 9th. Dr. Majidi and myself will actually be talking about empowering ourselves to overcome imposterism and increase our self-esteem. So with that said, please register. All of these events are free and open for everybody in the community, as well as to our students, alum, faculty, staff. And also just a quick call out. So if any of you are interested in becoming a presenter or speaker for our Elevating Voices speaker series, please go ahead and do so. And Ida, go ahead and put the survey in the chat. We'd love for all of you to give us some feedback and let us know what you thought about our session today. So there will be a link that we will be putting in the chat. And if you registered, we'll also send out an email to all of who has registered, just to kind of get an idea of what you thought about our event today, areas that, we can continue to work on, what your topics of interest are. And if you're interested in even presenting, we'd love to know that. And so with that said, again, thank you so much for joining us today. The Center for Global Partnership and Learning here at GCEP. And thank you, Sharletta, so much for just being a huge part of today. And you're the inaugurator. You inaugurated us. So it's a blessing. It started off with storytelling. I love it. And everybody's loving it. So thank you, everybody, for coming in. Thank you for attending the event. Please go ahead and click the link in the chat. Give us a survey, let us know what you think by, clicking on that survey. And, oh, is it? Okay. Sorry, Doctor. I'll fix the slide. Okay. Yeah. So I'll fix that little glitch there, but thank you again so much for being here. And so, while all of you leave, I just want to quickly ask for Dr. Gabby, Ida, Sharletta to kind of sit with me for a minute here on Zoom. But to everybody else, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.